Okay, hi, I'm Courtney Gilmore, and I'm going to be presenting my Gothic short story titled Vacancy. So, the synopsis of my story is that it surrounds around the stories and assumptions about a young girl who I describe throughout the story as a girl with bright eyes and yellow hair. And this girl appears to talk to herself. She claims to have a friend who is not existent and no one can see, and she plays mostly by herself and speaks to no one. So the story begins when a woman is watching in on the first day of school for this young girl, and the woman is presumably the teacher. So a boy goes up and is verbally abusing the young girl, saying like, "What's wrong with you? Why are you so weird?" and stuff like that. And so the girl physically defends herself. But before we can see the girl physically defend herself, it switches to a scene in a psychiatric hospital where the woman, who we thought was the teacher, is sitting. And by the connections of the physical features, we can see that she was the little girl in the story, so this was a flashback for her. So the Gothic elements of my story that I focused on were the dark setting. And by doing this, I chose the state of Washington because it receives the least amount of sunlight a year, so it's naturally dark and rainy all the time. Plus I set it in an old building. And then repressed memory, which I focused on by recreating a repressed memory in the story for the girl. And then the distortion of innocence occurs when because of the young girl who is suffering from this hallucination or delusion, which is the opposite of the norm in which we need to protect children from these things. So, but the repressed memory is what really led from my inspiration. So I'm a human development major, so I naturally choose anything that has to do with psychology or mental illness. But I have a close friend who suffers from acute schizoaffective disorder, which falls on the spectrum of bipolar disorder to schizophrenia. It falls right in the middle, meaning that she has a mood disorder, but also hallucinations. So I naturally see the ridicule and horrors that she lives in her everyday life. But my title also came from a symptom of this disorder, which is the flat affect or emotionless face. So vacancy meaning emptiness in the face. The biggest fear that I focused on was the fear of the mentally ill. So I just have some stats to start off with. 61% of people believe that schizophrenic people are dangerous. 38% of people are not comfortable being friends with someone who has a mental illness. 64% of people do not want to be co-workers with someone who has schizophrenia. And 68% of people do not want someone with depression to marry into their family. So I emphasize this fear in one specific passage of my story. The girl with yellow hair never stopped talking to her friend, and the other kids at school noticed. They noticed the way she wouldn't look at their faces. They noticed the way she would not speak to them when they asked her to come play tag or swing on the swings. But another fear that I focused on was the mentally ill becoming violent. Just a stat to start off with, 75% of stories about mentally ill people in the media involve violence. This is seen in TV shows, movies about serial killers who are mentally ill, but it's also seen in news stories that are told about the mentally ill. The media is constantly skewing our representations of the mentally ill people. But because of the media, people also tend to think that the mentally ill are possessed by demons. If you Google mentally ill people and possession, you'll get tons of pages that come up about how to tell the difference between demon possession and mental illness. So people are constantly trying to differentiate between the two things. But because of all these films and TV shows that depict these people in these light, people are afraid of becoming mentally ill themselves. The word for this is dementophobia, which sounds like dementia, so losing your mind. It's the fear of actually going insane. So often people don't realize that this is the real life for people. So they don't realize that people are living an actual Gothic story in their everyday life, like my friend who is living this. So this story served as a way that I could make people aware of the actualities of these people in their everyday lives. People are living with mental illness every day, and with the constant ridicule that they're receiving, from the media and the everyday world makes their own personal Gothic stories just as worse as it already is. So here are my references, and thank you for coming.